Okay, we're back. In the last video, I left off with Jesus had walked on the water, and he had spoken like God speaks in both the burning bush with Moses and also the way God speaks in Isaiah, especially those chapters like 27, 20, 29, 30. There's a lot of God saying, "It is I did this, I did that, I am this, I am that. And don't be afraid." So that's a theme in Isaiah, and Jesus speaks just like that. It sounds like Yahweh in those chapters in Isaiah. So when the disciples see him, he just says simply, "It is I, don't be afraid," which kind of echoes back to the prophet there, the voice of Yahweh through the prophet. And then they're immediately hit shore as soon as he says that. So there's this, little bit of a miracle in terms of, there's strong wind blowing and it's rough waters, and then as soon as Jesus speaks that, they're on shore. So he kind of takes care of that. It's not as dramatic as when he's asleep in the boat in the other Gospels, but it's something akin to that. So then we're on to verse 22 in chapter 6, and Jesus is engaging with the people, and we'll see how that goes. So the next day, this is the day after he fed the 5,000 people, the crowd that had stayed on the opposite shore of the lake, which is the Sea of Galilee, they realized that only one boat had been there and that Jesus had not entered it with his disciples, but that they had gone away alone. So in John, there's always a witness to something, and this is sort of a way of witnessing to the miracle that Jesus did, the walking on the water. So the disciples know that Jesus walked on the water, but the people kind of see it from a distance, and it's slowly occurring to them. And this is an aspect of John too. Kind of like when Jesus turned water into wine, the servants knew, but the people around don't really know. Here, the people around have a sense that something happened, and they're trying to figure it out. Verse 23. Then some boats from Tiberias, which is on the far western shore, and they have gone over to the northeastern shore. Boats from Tiberias landed near the place where the people had eaten the bread after the Lord had given thanks. So giving us a little bit of location. If you look at the Sea of Galilee like this, if this is the west over here, Tiberias is on the far west side. The place where the people were kind of farther east from Capernaum, and then this is kind of on that eastern shore. Anyway, they landed in this place. So verse 24, once the crowd realized that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they got into the boats and went to Capernaum in search of Jesus. So they're making their way around that kind of north side if you look at the map. Verse 25, when they found him on the other side of the lake, they asked him, "Rabbi, how did you get here?" When did you get here? So this is another, there's always a witness, right? There's a witness to the miracle. And this is another kind of indirect witness by them saying, "We know something happened because you weren't in the boat." And so they're saying, how did you do that? And Jesus, this is the norm for Jesus. He doesn't answer their questions directly. In fact, he doesn't answer their question at all. And Jesus often engages people on a level that is, it seems kind of snarky, right? When, if you go back to Nathanael in chapter 1, Jesus says, "So you think you believe because I said that? Just you wait," right? He kind of engages him that way. With Nicodemus, he's like, "You have to be born again to see the kingdom." And with the woman at the well, he does it in a couple ways. One of the ways is he says, "Go call your husband," right? Brings up all that stuff. And even with the man that he heals at the pool of Bethesda, he finishes off with him saying, don't sin anymore, so this won't happen to you again. So there's this little undercurrent of snarkiness, I think, in every little discourse that Jesus, every little engagement that Jesus has. So in verse 26, he does that with the crowd. He says, Jesus answered, "I tell you the truth, you are looking for me not because you saw the miraculous signs, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill. So he pretty much just tells him that, it's not about who I am or what I did. It's about you just getting some free lunch here. So he challenges him. This is normal. Verse 27, he says, "Do not work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. On him, God the Father has placed his seal of approval." That's an interesting translation there. Seal of approval, like the good housekeeping seal of approval. But he says he always moves to another level, right? He's dealing with people who are hungry and feeding them, and then he moves and says, "Don't work for food that spoils. Work for a different kind of food." Right? He always brings it down or up to the spiritual from the temporal. And then he also puts in there that he talks about himself in the third person as the Son of Man. That God has put his seal on the Son of Man. Jesus speaks of himself in the third person that way. Verse 28, so they asked him, "What must we do to do the work God requires?" Or another way it says, to do the works of God. Because Jesus has brought up the word work here, they also echo that word of work. He tells them to work for eternal food. And they say, "Well, what work should we do? What is this work?" And Jesus answers, "The work of God is this, to believe in the one who he has sent." And this is always if there's a formula, it's this: to believe, right? To see and hear, to be witness to see a sign, but it always ends up with believing that Jesus has been sent by God. All the way back to chapter 1, right, where in the beginning was the Word was with God, becomes flesh and dwells among them. And so those who believe have the power of life. So again, this is the same focus. Believe in the one who he has sent. Verse 30, so they asked him, "What miraculous sign then will you give us that we may see it and believe you?" So this is funny. They kind of turn the tables on Jesus, right? Jesus talks about work. They say, "What work should we do?" He says, "Believe." And then they say, "Well, what work will you do? And what miraculous sign will you do?" So they push it back on Jesus. Like he's putting it on them to believe. They're putting it on him to say, "Well, do something that we may believe." And this is, of course, after the people have eaten their fill. Now, we're told that these boats came and landed near the place where they ate. So maybe these are people who ate the food. We're not sure. Kind of assume that they took place with this miracle, but maybe some didn't. It's hard to really know. Jesus says, "You ate your fill." So Jesus acts like they're the ones who have taken part in the miracle and seen it. But here they are asking for another one, which is like the people. It's like the people in Exodus with Moses, right? They complain, Moses gives them water. They complain, Moses gives them food. They complain. I mean, that's just the way, right? They want a sign. So, and then they say, "What will you do for us?" And then verse 31, "Our forefathers ate manna in the desert, as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat." So they reference back to chapter 16 in Exodus, where Moses and God through Moses gives them manna. And, we're talking about bread here. So, and that was the miraculous sign then. And then Jesus corrects them in verse 32 and says, "I tell you the truth, it is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven." Verse 33, "For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." So they reference the past, and Jesus takes that miracle and brings it into the present, right? If you can hear that. He says, Moses didn't give you that bread, but God gave it, and he gives you the true bread. He gives you the true bread from heaven, right? And the way it's even worded, he said, Moses didn't give you that, God gives you this, right? So he pulls it right into the present from the past. And he says, it's the one who comes down from heaven. This is the bread. And verse 34, they say, "Sir, from now on, give us this bread." And this response is almost exactly like the woman at the well when Jesus says, if you knew who I was, you'd ask me for water. And he tells her about living water well up inside her. And she says, "Give me this water, sir. Please give me this water." They say the same thing. Please give us this bread. And then 35, Jesus declares, "I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never go hungry. He who believes in me will never be thirsty." And then Jesus continues a little farther. I've kind of gone over 10 minutes, so I'm going to stop there and pick it up with the next few verses. But this speaking of the first I am statement, "I am the bread of life," Jesus does that here. And the I am statements take a little bit of explaining, so I'll pick that up in the next video so that we can understand the framework of the I am statements. There's it's considered to be 7 miraculous signs, although there's more than that, and 7 I am statements, although there's 2 sets of I am statements. So we'll cover that in the next video. All right, thank you.